I live in Chicago. I am a developer advocate. I co-host a security repo podcast. Very quickly, I work for a company called Get Guardian. That's why I got super interested in working with credentials and why this topic came across my plate. We help people figure out where those credentials are and what to do about them. We also have honey tokens and IAC scanning, but that's about all I'm going to talk about us today formally. But if you just stop letting your credentials leak, there wouldn't be a problem. We could all just go to lunch now. So just stop doing it and promise, pinky swear, and we'll go. No, I'm kidding. When I say secrets, I mean credentials. And when I say credentials, I mean secrets. They're the same word to me, but they're the API keys, the username, password pairs, database connection strings, Slack connection strings, env files, PEM files, CRT files, or anything that encrypts or decrypts data or gives you access to another system. So that's what I mean by credential. We're in this constant cat and mouse game where attackers are always after our stuff. And when I say us, I'm really talking about people in the DevOps space, the developers in the world, the engineers of the world, the super admins of the world. We're making it easy on the attackers, not making it easier on ourselves because we keep leaking our credentials out to the world. Here are a few examples of what I mean in the real world. So sorry if it's scary. Sorry if anybody there works for Uber or any of the other companies I'll just quickly mention. But Uber got phished. A super admin there got phished last year. And they had multi-factor authentication on. They were doing it right. But we don't know if his thumb slipped or he just got bombarded by so many, he finally accepted one. But a super admin got his credentials phished. The attacker got into the system, found a bunch of PowerShell scripts that had hard-coded credentials in them. This is the classic MO of the attacker. It's breach and establish an initial foothold, look around for anything that can get me more access laterally, letting me slide around, expand my footprint, and then escalate privileges. Since this was the super admin, it was very easy for him to do all of those things. And the fact that those hard-coded credentials there made his life really, really easy. You might have been hit by this. January 3rd, everybody woke up and said, my Circle CI credentials have been rotated. What's up with that? Well, for a remote developer who was running a Plex server that had never been patched, got his system infiltrated. From there, the attacker was able to plant some malware inside of Circle CI's infrastructure and started stealing credentials that were, again, laying around in plain text. Those credentials were then used to get into the client interface, the client environments, and started stealing the client data, customer data. The same day that they announced, like, the only thing we could do is rotate. Sorry, everybody. A third-party security researcher said, hey, all of my honey tokens went off. All my earlier warning systems, my fake credentials I planted out there, all went off inside of Circle CI. Something's going on. About 2 hours later, we all knew what had gone on. This is a fun one. Anybody here drive a Toyota? Raise your hand. I can see about 3 of you. If you drive a Toyota, then you might be familiar with T-Connect system. T-Connect is the remote car start system that connects to their help desk. A contractor was hired back in 2017 to take care of this, do some patching and maintenance, and push part of that repository that runs T-Connect out into public GitHub. Unfortunately, it had a key to a real data server in it. And that data server had 296,000 plus customers' data. It took them 5 years to figure out it was out there, and they had no idea how many people accessed that server. All they could really do at Toyota is say, hey, we're sorry, you're probably going to get a phishing email. We fixed it now, but we don't know who has your email. So that's what it looks like in the real world when your credentials leaked. We know that this is a problem because it appears multiple times in the OWASP top 10. Broken access control, cryptographic failures, insecure design. This is just going to happen. We almost have to assume breach at this point. Last year, our company, Get Guardian, we put out the state of secret sprawl. We put it out every year. But this is the data from 2022. We found over 10 million hard-coded credentials hanging out in GitHub public repos. That's a lot. In fact, stolen credentials are the number one way people are getting in the first place. Verizon said this back in the DBIR report, and Sophos said this earlier this year. I wrote a blog post, and that's from a blog post, but the Sophos report is a great read. So how are we leaking our passwords? Well, basically we're doing this, except nobody's going to do this. This is dumb. We're doing this a lot. We're hard coding credentials because it's easy. Sometimes you just got to test to make sure it works. The issue is that we test a secret. The problem is then we commit them and then push them out to the world. So what's the point of this talk? Well, what do we do if we think we're exposed? Well, first, how do you know you're exposed? If you can see a plain text credential in your code or in your message system or Jira, assume you're being breached. Just assume that someone else that you don't know has that. The same thing with configuration files. Same thing if you've never looked through your log files to look for credentials, we should probably take a look there. Or wait for somebody to tell you, as was the case with Uber. The attacker went to the New York Times. That's why we know about it. So what should you do if that happens to you? I think it's these 6 things. I'll be very brief on these. And again, you can get the slides to go through it. First, you're a human being. At the end of the day, computers are computers and systems are systems, and no one dies on the internet. Just breathe. You're not the first person to go through this, and definitely will not be the last to get breached. None of those companies I talked about went out of business. Some of those people lost their jobs, sure, but the world didn't end. Their companies, their reputations, they got other jobs. So you will get through this. If you get really scared, just recite the Bene Gesserit when against fear. I'm a huge Doom nerd, so this is what I say to myself when I get really, really scared. Second thing to do is validate. Do I have something to actually be concerned about here? Is this for a open API that everyone has a key to that I don't really need to worry? Or is this for my Kubernetes cluster that would let anyone escalate privilege and become super admin? Is it still a valid secret? Did we rotate this one already? Is this something from 5 years ago? How old is it? What all does it expose? Where was it exposed? Was it on public GitHub or is it still in a private repo and still do something about it? How many times have we encoded it? These are the questions to ask yourself. Scope the impact. Is this going to affect your little system that you wrote on the side that 3 other services ever have touched in the history of the project? Or is this crucial infrastructure that will take down the whole system if you just rip out that credential? Your gut feeling might be, hey, I should just rotate this credential, and you're not wrong, but just know what that impact will be. Once you have scoped out, like, hey, I know what all systems this affects, notify those teams. There's a team lead. There's probably a security person in charge of this with that team. Figure out who it is. Talk to them. If you have a book of procedures, start there and probably give me an email address at least. Pick up the phone. Start calling people like, hey, this happened. I'm going to rotate this credential. Be aware. We might have some downtime. There probably is going to be some issues around this. Report it properly. Reporting is very, very important for the health of your entire organization for a few reasons. First, a security team can be on top of it and can help out. I'm assuming you're not on the security team if you're watching this talk. If you are on the security team, encourage people to report things. You're never going to get in trouble for doing the right report, saying, hey, this happened. This is how we're going to fix it. We need some help. Here's proof of the system. Here's proof of the breach. Let's fix this together. That's what they want you to do. That's what the company should be encouraging. If they're not, maybe you should have that conversation with the higher end. And then finally you get to the thing that your gut told you to do in the very first part, which is now it's time to rotate your credential. Now, all the pieces are in place. You know what potential downtime you're going to have. You have a recovery plan. Go ahead and rotate. Whether you're using CyberArk to do it automatically, or you're doing it manually, or using like AWS automated credential rotation, which is something you can just turn on in the settings. You should have a plan, and it's time to make that plan happen. So that's what you do if you've been breached. But what about future breaches, future leaks of your credentials out there? Well, first, you get in the habit of never using or never putting credentials in plain text in your code. If you do need to quickly test something, that's what env files are awesome for, and that's what gitignore is great with. So stuff it in an env file, use gitignore. Except the problem with gitignore is that it's easy to mess it up. Like there, you can see I've commented out the env file, then Git doesn't ignore it, and it's going to include that env file, and then we're back to square one with the problem. We just put the credential in a file instead of it directly in their code. That's why vaults are awesome. HashiCorp Vault, which is now BSL licensed, not open source anymore, but it's still free. And all the platforms like Azure, AWS, Google, they all offer a secret manager or a key vault system. Use those. They're awesome. That's what they're there for. Leverage those across the board. Very, very briefly, you can also set up things like Git hooks to do pre-commit checks. There's a lot of ways to do this. We make one called GG Shield, but basically it says there's, again, Git leaks, Trufflehog, AWS Labs, Git secrets. There's multiple ways to climb this tree. And as a developer, you should be checking, hey, did I put any credentials in my code by accident? And if I did, stop me from making that commit. There's a whole other talk I give about that called My Credential Must Have Been Leaked. Or Stop Leaking Your Credentials, Git Hooks to the Rescue. You can find that on YouTube, and there's a whole talk about that. So what do you do for future leaks? How do you prepare for when you do get breached? You already know what to do during an active breach. We already talked about that briefly. But if you ask Google, this is their developer doc on this issue. Redesign your app. That's the entire doc. I'm not kidding. I think it comes down to more internal policy and conversations you have. And I think those turn into playbooks. If you don't have playbooks in place to know what to do, go ask your security team, hey, do we have any procedures in place in case we get breached? If their answer was, hey, we've been meaning to build those, guess what? You have a great project you could volunteer for. You need to be security champions to cause change in your organizations, I firmly believe. So talk to them. Say, hey, I'd like to help you build a playbook. Playbooks can just take the stuff you've learned from those past incidents and put them in writing. That's why reporting is super important. That you can just take those reports, say, what did we do well, do a retro on it, and then write down what should have happened. In its simplest term, playbooks are just, if this happens, do this. If this happens, do that. You don't need to overthink it. It could just be as easy as, hey, call this person who's in charge of our secrets rotation and hit go. It could be that simple. And again, just think through, like, how are you going to validate if you're the level of exposure, the level of risk that breach carries. Automate your playbooks if possible. I give a whole other talk on automating things with Jupyter notebooks, but we ain't got time for that today. If you want to see one of those in action, we built one of those that talks about remediation with Git Guardian, and that's out there on our GitHub. So in conclusion, it's really hard to win on defense. What we need to do is act quickly, methodically, and stop attackers as soon as they get access. One of the easiest ways to do that is assume breach. Assume that you have been compromised if you ever do see plain text credentials out there. They should never be in plain text, just period. It shouldn't. If you see one being passed around Slack, you see one in Jira, you see one in Discord, you see one in the code, say something. Figure out how to solve that. If you do get a breach, if you do, hey, there's an attacker on our network, breathe. First, take care of yourself. If you need to call somebody for your mental health, call them. Please take care of yourself as a person first. Then validate there's actually a concern. Act with a calm mind, move through the process that you've established, scope the impact, notify the impacted teams, report it, and then finally rotate that secret. You can build playbooks out of those processes that you developed and look through the past reports on what worked, what didn't, and how to improve those. Every breach should be a learning opportunity, if nothing else. But that's it. I'm Dwayne. I live in Chicago. I know that was a lot really fast, but I've also given this talk in an hour instead of 15 minutes. That's why I'm a little over time, so sorry about that. And I'll let you get to lunch, and I'll happy to answer any questions out there on the internet. You can feel free to contact me. And if you want to talk about improv or rock and roll, hit me up for that stuff too.